3 months before the accident, I'd gone to the BBC and said, unless you change something, someone's going to die on this show.
Top Gear host Chris Harris has slammed the BBC over Freddie Flintoff's life-threatening horror crash in a scathing new interview. The TV star revealed he warned bosses prior to the accident that someone would be killed on the set of the motoring show if safety issues weren't addressed. The former England cricketer Flintoff suffered life-changing injuries in 2022 when the three-wheeled car he was driving flipped over. The sportsman wasn't wearing a helmet and suffered facial scarring and broken ribs. The crash looked so bad that Harris, who was on site that day, thought his friend and co-star had died. Speaking to Joe Rogan on a podcast, he said he wasn't wearing a crash helmet, and if you do that, even at 25, 30 miles an hour, the injuries that you sustain are profound. I was there on the day. I was the only presenter with Fred that day. I wasn't actually right by him, but I was close by. I remember the radio message that I heard. I always used to have a radio in my little room at the test track where I was sitting inside so I could hear what was going on. And I heard someone say, there has been a real accident here. The car's upside down. So I ran to the window, looked out, and he wasn't moving. If he wasn't so strong, he wouldn't have survived. He's a great advert for physical strength and conditioning because if he hadn't been that strong, he'd have just snapped his neck. He'd be dead. Taking aim at the Beeb and Top Gear bosses, Harris said he believes the briefing for the stunt was insufficient. He said, so that day was very difficult, made even more difficult by the fact that the build-up to that particular shoot, I knew that we were, at the last minute, that we were using a Morgan three-wheeler. It's a very difficult car. If I'm looking in the mirror, I find it very difficult, even now, that Andrew, who I love to bits, a lovely man, he was a pro cricket player. He wasn't an automotive guy. But what was never spoken about was that 3 months before the accident, I'd gone to the BBC and said, unless you change something, someone's going to die on the show. So I went to them and I went to the BBC and I told them of my concerns from what I'd seen as the most experienced driver on the show. I said if we carry on, at the very least, we're going to have a serious injury. At the very worst, we're going to have a fatality. And I think what happened with Top Gear was I saw repeatedly, too many times, my two co-hosts who didn't have the experience that I had in cars. This is the critical thing. I'm qualified to make those decisions because I've done it a long time. They weren't. One of them is an actor-comedian. The other guy is a pro cricket player. Brilliant entertainers. They were great hosts, but their roles were to make people laugh, and my role was to tell people what cars were like.